In the WEkEO Jupyter Lab environment, the first thing you will usually see once you've initiated your instance is the launcher window, which is what's right in front of you here. From here, you can access a number of different functionalities that Jupyter Lab has to offer. If you've already cloned the training repository that we're going to be working with over the course of this training, you've probably already accessed the terminal. But just to remind you, what this basically is almost like a command line prompt that you would use to interact with your computer. Whether you've used Windows or Linux, you may well have done this. This allows you to interact with the Jupyterlab environment in a similar way, and much of the commands are based upon the same sorts of things that you might use in a Linux system. So you can, for example, remove files, delete them, you can navigate between directories, you can make a list of what's in there using command line prompts as you might in a normal computing environment. You can also, quite crucially here, open up a new Jupyter notebook, and this is what we're going to be looking at for the most part, but if you want to open a blank one to work from yourself, you can just click this button here, and this will open a Python 3 compatible Jupyter notebook. You can tell it's a Jupyter notebook from the IPYNB extension. Basically, this just refers to the fact that this is an interactive Python notebook. They start blank like this, and you can either write pieces of code, or you can write markdown and text as well, but this will become a bit more clear to you when you've seen some of the examples if you're unfamiliar with how Jupyter notebooks work. So let's take a look at some of those. So if you've already cloned the Jupyterlab repository, as per the previous videos that you may have seen and from the demonstration, you will have a WEkEO Jupyter Lab folder in your home directory here. So if you double click on that, it will expand and show you what's within it. You can see here's the empty notebook that I've just created, so we'll delete that because I don't need it. Within this folder, there's several subfolders, which include thematic notebooks, which we'll talk more about in a second. There's author information, licensing information, and a general README that would help you to understand how this repository works. But the best place to start when you're new to this environment is our Welcome to WEkEO Jupyter Lab Jupyter Notebook. If you double click that, it will open. And this notebook basically provides you with an overall guide to what the WEkEO Jupyter Lab is, some basic information about how it and Jupyter notebooks work, how the Python environment is set up, how to use a Jupyter notebook, and then there's also a bit of guidance on how to approach working through some of the example scripts that we're providing here. So I would highly recommend you start with this, read through, get a bit of an understanding about the environment. We have Python 3.7 in here, for example. There's a reminder here of how to clone repositories including the one that you've got here. If you wanted to start with a fresh version of the repository, you could rerun this script from the command prompt in the Jupyter Hub. It talks a little bit about managing code and managing your Python environment, and then provides some hints and tips. And this is quite important. So the Jupyter Lab is necessarily a limited environment. It's mostly designed for you to test things and get to know the WEkEO tools and software and principles that we're talking about during this training. So there's limitations to what you can do. You can't download all the Copernicus data that ever existed, and you probably can't make hundreds and hundreds of plots. But it should give you enough of an idea about the sorts of things you can do so that you can make a decision about whether you'd like to, for example, sign up for one of our virtual machines so that you can expand what you're able to do with the data. But there's some tips here about how to manage this environment, keep the memory that you're using lower, and just generally good practice kind of coding and memory usage. After that section, we talk more about the Jupyter notebooks. It tells you here how to run them by clicking the play button here. It also tells you about the different types of cells that you have in a Jupyter notebook. So you have code, you also have markdown, which is what the text and links, for example, in here are written in. So you can use Jupyter notebooks in this really nice interactive fashion to both have clear, readable narrative and executable code. So it's quite a powerful teaching tool, which is why we use it. Further down here, then, we talk about the example code that we've provided. The best place to go after this notebook is probably to have a look at the Harmonized Data Access API Introduction notebook. That's accessible through this link, or you can double click on the left here on the WEkEO HDA folder, and this is the notebook there. The other notebooks in here include some functions that we use, And if you open that notebook, you can work through an example of how to work with Wekio's Harmonized Data Access API. And this is really an essential thing about understanding how Wekio works. It's quite a powerful approach that allows you to make a single point query. So from here in the Jupyter Lab environment, you can basically query all the different types of Copernicus data that are available. And through the Harmonized Data Access API, it will go off and find the data wherever it is, whether it's with one of the agencies who operate the satellites or with the services, and it will bring that data then back for you to work with in the Wekio environment. So that's a good place to start. This is really at the heart of what Wekio is about. And after you've learned then to access data, you can have a look at some of the example notebooks that we provided, which tell you a bit more about how the data itself works and how it can be used. There's two folders here that you can access. So the first one is on Sentinel-3. And you'll find some examples here that will help you to understand how the different instruments on Sentinel-3 work and the sorts of data they provide. And then following that, you can have a look at the ocean case studies examples. So there's two examples in here from the Copernicus Marine Service showing some of their products. And then you've got two thematic examples here using Sentinel-3 to look at cyanobacterial blooms and heat waves. This one actually also includes CMEMS data. So it's showing a little bit about how you can start bringing together both satellite data and downstream merged satellite data products and models together to investigate different marine phenomena. Once you've had a go with all these different notebooks, you can ask lots of questions in the chat, and we're very happy to answer. There's also some other videos which focus specifically on these individual notebooks, so you might want to have a look at those next.